Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. I have to read out the broadcast statement. Welcome to this meeting of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority. This meeting is being held at, here. The meeting is being recorded for broadcast on the authority's website and will be available for repeated viewing after the local elections, because we are now in election purdah. The press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting, though those remaining at the meeting are consenting to being filmed and recorded and to the possible use of those images and recordings for broadcasting purposes. There is no scheduled fire alarm today, so if it goes off, out that door, turn left and follow someone with uniform. Do we need microphones in here? Yes. Oh, of course, we're recording, yeah. You all have a microphone. If you're not using it, can you turn it off, because it does sap the power from the other ones. So, item 1, apologies. Katie?
We just have apologies from the Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any? No. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting held on the 15th of February. Does anyone have any, they want to comment on the meetings? Page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you're happy if I sign those? Okay. I will. Item 4, any deputations? No, none. Item 5, Chairman's announcements, buckets of them. Right, we have just had the Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services started yesterday with the fieldwork element of the inspection. This is the first inspection of the combined service and follows the COVID inspection in 2020. As members are aware, the inspection plays a vital role in the service, telling us where we are, where we need to be, and how we can continue to improve. It will demonstrate the progress made since the last inspection and allows our communities to scrutinise how we keep them safe and the service they receive from us. The fieldwork will continue until June, and a report will then be published in the winter. The Chief Officer and his team will keep members up to date as appropriate, but if you have any questions in the meantime, please get in touch with Shantha. And members, at the next APAG, we can show you the strategic presentation that was done yesterday. Chief, any comment?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, members, obviously the service is looking forward to and enjoying the HMR being with us as best as you can when you're being regularly scrutinised. But actually it's a very important part of the current framework in terms of successes or otherwise of the English Fire and Rescue Services. We do consider ourselves to be a good organisation in as much as we like to learn, like to understand what could be improved. We spend a lot of time looking at other services and learning from them, various networks. So this is an additional opportunity to improve, and we look forward to reporting back our progress. And of course, there'll be a public announcement of their scoring of us at some time in the future. But I'll keep you involved in what we're discovering during that journey.
While I've got him, you will notice that the Chief on the right side of his chest is sporting a new decoration. Would you like to explain to them what it is?
Thank you, Chairman. I had a lovely letter from the Chairman. So I've completed 30 years service, and 10 of those now I've been in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So there's a meritorious service medal, which is, you recall we gave it to the previous Chairman. It's a meritorious service medal for many reasons, but 30 years service or 10 years in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, you can receive that medal. So the Chairman wrote to me recently awarding me for my 30 years plus 10, or including 10 here. So I'm still feeling slightly old, but still very proud to wear the Hampshire medal. Thank you.
Right, next item on my thing. Best Emergency Service Collaboration Award. Hampshire and Isle of Wight firefighters and police officers have been recognised for the important part they played in supporting vulnerable patients during the COVID-19 pandemic. A team from Hampshire and the Isle of Wight and Rescue Service and Hampshire Constabulary won a Best Emergency Service Collaboration Award for their work in intensive care units at the Skills for Health, our Health Heroes Award on the 24th of March. In total, 27 firefighters assisted frontline medics at 4 Hampshire hospitals by helping to care for some of the most vulnerable patients. Volunteers from Hampshire Constabulary stepped in to help at University Hospital, Southampton. To alleviate pressure on the NHS staff at the peak of COVID, hospital leaders trained up the multi-agency team in proning. I expect you want to know what proning is. That involves putting patients onto their fronts to relieve pressure on their vital organs and assist breathing. Firefighters Matthew Smither, crew manager Sophie Exton-Woodford, watch manager Adam Bundle, station manager Alex Rhodes and group manager Craig Gregory accepted the award on behalf of the team alongside PC Matthew James and Sergeant Stu Bridle from Hampshire Constabulary and representatives from University Hospital, Southampton. This award is a reflection of the brilliant partnership work carried out by the emergency service throughout the COVID pandemic. Well done. Chief, any comment?
Just a quick one, Chairman. Yeah, enormously proud of the teams, and it shows how this organisation has adapted or can adapt, really living in line with our values. Clearly, we made the point yesterday to the HMI about the additional work that we've been doing during that period, but it shows the culture and the values of our organisation. They're willing to step into this space and assist colleagues in need. Also shows a growing culture in our health colleagues to be able to reach out and ask for help in the first instance and willingly receive it from the likes of us and the Constabulary. So very proud of the teams. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep.
Can I just ask, is that you just mentioned that it was a Southampton hospital, but I'm quite aware, as everything else is I'm sure, is that the teams also did a lot of work in QA hospital. Would that come separately if there's going to be an award there or not?
I don't like to preempt awards, but yeah, the challenging issues you'll know with the hospital trusts that they are separated. A new integrated care system comes into being shortly. But I think we're widely recognised by all our partners. This one, we were nominated particularly by them for this national award, which is very nice, this particular trust. But others have recognised it in different ways. So we're grateful, obviously, for every recognition. We passed that on to our teams to thank them.
Okay, next up, Convoy to Ukraine. A mission organised and led by Charity Fire Aid and National Fire Chiefs Council saw more than 5,000 items of donated kit taken to Poland and onward transportation into Ukraine. Members of the operational assets and international search and rescue teams, with the help of family members, sorted several tons of equipment that is no longer used in the service. The ISAR team then transported this to Kent and assisted in a nationally led effort over the course of a week to prepare and pack the convoy of 22 vehicles for the drive to Ukraine. 20 fire engines, thermal imaging cameras for finding victims, generators, lighting, hoses, rescue equipment, and thousands of sets of PPE were among the items being donated. Every fire service across the UK stepped in to support these efforts. 2 firefighters from Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service joined the convoy to Ukraine. Watch manager Daryl Pinniger and crew manager Spencer Harrison helped transport equipment, protective clothing and medical supplies alongside personnel from fire and rescue services across the UK. Daryl and Spencer are both members of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Rescue Service Urban Search and Rescue Team and the UK International Search and Rescue. I should mention that our ISA team have done this in their own time. The donation of vehicle and equipment are in use now in Ukraine, saving lives, testament to the multitude of people across our organisations, from the operational assets, insurance, fleet management and fleet maintenance team, as well as our ISA members and strategic leadership. This is a great example of a quick and effective cross-industry collaboration. There are, of course, lessons to be learned, and we look forward to putting these into practice for the next time, a second convoy, which is currently being planned. It's good stuff, this, isn't it? Chief, any comment?
Again, just a quick one, because often the question comes up of, it seemed like we had tons of spare kit And that's not the case. Our ISAR team have been doing a fantastic job of collecting some sort of national assets from that arrangement in this area that went across to Kent. But also our normal sort of discharge arrangements that Matt, our corporate director, oversees. Often things are sold, sometimes it's donated to charity, and there are a number of charities that do this supply across the world. But that's a mix on return for our investment, your investment as a fire authority. We don't just give everything away, but obviously in this instance, we did our best to support as best we could. There were no vehicles. We gave no vehicles this time. There may be some vehicles in the next opportunity in our fleet that become spare after we replace some. But we do not have a dearth of kit that we'd like to give away a lot. It's one of those things that we do what we can to support, and services, a little bit from each service makes quite a lot in the end of it, and that's what happened down in Kent. So all credit to the teams here, but also the national effort to support the Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item, the LGA FAR Conference. Councillor Price, Councillor Hughes and myself attended the annual LGA FAR Conference, and also Councillor Stevens was there in his role as Obersturmbannführer LGA, where we were provided updates from the Fire Minister. We also had the opportunity to take part in interesting workshops about good governance, peer support, and the challenge from the LGA, as well as climate change. Whilst there, we took the opportunity to meeting the Police and Fire Crime Commissioner from Essex, Roger Hurst, to hear about how he works it, because after all, he is being put up as a role model for all governance. Fascinating man, because he runs the Joint Police and Fire Governance. We will use this information to form our response to the government white paper once it is published, and we are hearing rumours that it might be May the 12th. This year. If you wish to hold your breath.
Chairman, I've also got suggestions for the entry at 4 o'clock, if that helps as well.
Yes. We must not jest. So, Roger, any comment on the meeting from your perspective?
I think that the meeting with Roger was very interesting, and from my perspective, it just shows that what we have here is better than what you have when you have a PCC, because it's just one person who's making a decision, whereas here we are making it collectively, and we can bounce ideas off one another, and that is much better without paying for it, whereas he was actually bringing in experts, or so-called experts, to advise him, but having to pay for it. So I think that our system is much better than what is actually happening in Essex, and that I would not want to go down the PCC taking over fire. But that's a very personal point of view, but that's how I felt from the meeting. I think the conference as a whole was very interesting. I don't think that it had the teeth that it has had in the past in some areas. Sorry, Ian, but I think that it just didn't have that gusto feel which I sometimes have felt in the past. But there was some interesting bits of information that came out of it.
Thank you. I agree with Roger. I asked Roger, the other Roger, the question. I said, look, I've got 10 people I can bounce off. But what do you do? And he said, because I have this image of one glorious person, running everything. And he said, well, I've got a committee which I work with, which, as Roger says, almost probably twice as expensive as this, and probably not as effective. So it is an interesting conundrum.
Do you have any idea what costs are being incurred by consultants and experts? Was that question asked?
No, I thought that might be impertinent, but I mean, it's got to be more expensive.
I think it's kind of important, actually, because
it's
a very important question.
Yes, but I didn't want to ask him. Okay, Gary, have you got any comments on the meeting?
Well, I was the new boy on the block at Newcastle, so it was really a journey of discovery for myself. The most unsettling thing I took away from Newcastle, and I still can't get my head around this, is how it was described that the fire service are woefully underrepresented at the EDI level. And then you would determine that actually they base that statistic purely on frontline staff, not the whole of the organisation. If you look at the whole of the organisation, that is not an accurate assessment. It's like giving somebody 39 playing cards with no hearts and saying there's not enough red cards. It seems, and I actually went and asked one of the inspectors, why is it done like that? And he couldn't really give me an answer. And I genuinely believe if you're going to be, if you are fully representative across the whole, the totality of the organisation, there should be some form of pushback to the inspector because they're not assessing you fairly. And I've always been brought up in life, we should be fair and consistent in everything we try to achieve. And I genuinely and sincerely believe that the way they're measuring EDI in the fire service at the moment is not fair, and it probably isn't consistent either with other organisations.
Okay, thank you. Ian, would you like just a brief comment on, it was your meeting?
It was my conference, actually.
Part of your conference.
Not just a meeting. And it was quite, I thought it was quite good. It was the first LGA meeting where people could actually come together in the line of service, whether it was social care or, in this case, fire. And the attendance was lower than in previous years, but I thought it was not the cut and thrust that we've had in previous years, I'll grant you that, Roger, but I do think that it's a stepping stone back out of the pandemic and virtual meetings. And I think that was underwritten by the fire minister who came along and opened the session with Councillor Chard, which I thought was very telling. I think that once again, looking at the situation with regard to let's say the PCC in Essex, who's undertaken the role as a champion for fire as well down there, and what have you. We, as a whole, authorities throughout England, campaigned against having a PCC to control fire, and that seems to have resonated in the right quarters, because I think that's been withdrawn from the mandatory stages to where it could be accepted. The same way that Essex said they want to do to move forward in the model that they've got. I fully agree with you, Chair, that as far as I'm concerned, and no doubt the members of this board, you won't get any finer scrutiny than sitting here and putting something before us, and we can discuss it. It gets its own form of scrutiny, and there's nothing better to underpin policy than damn good scrutiny, and I think that's where we win, and I think that has been recognised through government. I think the one point that we have got with fire is the different types of governance there are, from the Met to county brigades to fire authorities, etc. And that is something that I think the minister is trying to pull in, to have a one named person. But I see no reason why that person can't be the chair of our board, and we continue as we are, and that's what I've put forward. I think that we're pretty strong with what we do, and Hampshire and Isle of Wight have got a very good record and reputation in that quarter. So why change it if it's working as well as it is here, and long may it continue. Going back to the conference, we tried to encompass various plenaries that would be of interest, and we do welcome the input from different authorities to come forward with the display of excellence and exhibiting good practice, etc. So I think we did a fairly good job. It's always good to have the feedback, and I thank you for that. And you had your feedback forms as well. I hope you've sent those through. But one thing I would say about Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, your presence was very well received and very well respected, because to get to Gateshead, and take two or 3 days out of your diary to get there, you expect something in return. We hope we gave you something, but also the commitment shown by Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority is second to none. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ian, for your kind words. Good. Thank you. Moving on, the Chief and I are going to the Isle of Wight on Thursday to meet with the Lord Lieutenant, Susie Sheldon, as well as the leader of the Isle of Wight Council, Laura P.C. Wilcox, and Ian will be there as well, because there is a Prince's Trust presentation over there. Again, this is good for our continued working relationship. We had a groundbreaking ceremony at Bishop's Waltham. I wouldn't say the fire station because it isn't there yet, but it will be built by the end of the year. The Chief, Stu, and Matt and his team, which was a very, I would say it was a jolly occasion, wasn't it? And I got to keep the spade. And lastly, Stu and I went to Bembridge at the end of March, because as you know, we've had a few local difficulties there, and it was a really good meeting. I got the whole, almost half the parish council there, and interesting parties. As you know, the problem is that we're actually getting manning for it is difficult there because they've got a lifeboat station, and most of the people who we would want go to the lifeboat. But we are moving forward. There is going to be a change of vehicle there, a smaller one, which makes it easier. I mean, Bembridge is about to become the largest village in the country. I mean, there's a plan to build 200 more houses. So it needs an active and working fire station. And so, Ian, I'll fill you in later. But I think, Stu, would you like to comment on it? We are encouraged.
Yeah, very encouraged, and thank you for your intervention and introduction. I think it's always difficult when we're talking to smaller village communities to get the interest, the enthusiasm, and also the knowledge of commitment, because it is quite a significant commitment that we ask from on-call staff. So we were able to do that. We were able to meet some of the community, and we look forward to moving that one forward with the help of the community. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay. Right. That's it from me. Item 6, members' developments. Jonathan?
I was able to attend last month, 21st, 22nd of March. It was obviously a 2-day virtual course. I'll just read it here. Giving greater confidence to leaders and portfolio holders to face the challenges of ensuring that buildings and the residents are safe. So it's very apropos to the work that we do. The course helped us to understand our scrutiny role in overseeing the work of housing departments, understand the key policy issues and challenges regarding the new building safety regime, exploring new responsibilities as duty holders under both the Building Safety Bill and the Fire Safety Act order, leading and delivering the practical and cultural changes required in staff training, technology and assurance processes, and to ensure that residents' voices are at the heart of changes to their building safety approach. One of the most interesting aspects of the course was a PhD student who had done a study of the Ronan Point disaster many, many years ago, when we were all quite young. The name, of course, resonates with us all. And the history of how we have improved the aspect of building security since then is quite extraordinary, in spite of the tragedy of Grenfell. So I did ask Katie, who I know she's done it, to send on all the slides to everybody. And if you've got, if you get a chance to see the slides, they are actually, will explain everything to you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, I sent those details to the building portfolio holder at Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, because as it said on the joint instructions, it would be good if they sort of had slightly more awareness of what the fire service deal with. I must check and see if he went. But anyway, thank you, Jonathan. Any more members' development? Ian.
Stu Adamson came to the Isle of Wight and met with me, and we visited Newport Fire Station and met the crew that was on watch at the time. And we had a frank discussion, exchange of views, and morale seemed to be very high indeed, and I was pleased to witness that. So that was good, but also during discussion with Stu, we're moving towards collaborating with the Isle of Wight Council Social Care Department for fire prevention checks and working more collaboratively with the Social Care Department for the island. I think that's a must, and I also hope that not just meeting, but good things come out of it, so we get an understanding on both sides of where we want to be and where we should be. Leave it at that, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks. I mean, that's good to hear, because that's the sort of message we must put to the Lord Lieutenant on Thursday, that morale is high. Good stuff. Any more? Gary.
Thank you, Chair. The next Carbon Pathway Programme Board is scheduled for the end of April, but in the interim I asked Matt for an update where we are in terms of the surveys for electronic vehicle charging points across the estate. That's going on, but the outcome of the full survey won't be known for some time. I did ask him the question, given the relationship between high fuel prices and electric vehicle charging points, whether there's a change in the priority, and the response from Matt was quite simply, it almost makes us want to accelerate those surveys and get those electronic vehicle charging points in, so we can go to an electronic fleet for the smaller vehicles as a driver. I'm hoping to meet with Matt and Karen and the team next month in order to assess where we are and get the outcome from the programme board, and I will report at the next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more members? No? Okay. Thank you. Item 7, the annual pay policy statement, and I would ask Molly to present this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. So this cover report and its appendix contains our annual pay policy statement, which we're required to publish under the Localism Act and has to be approved by the full authority and can't be delegated to a subcommittee. So this statement outlines our pay policies for the financial year and contains particular information relating to the remuneration of the Chief Fire Officer in relation to the pay of the remaining workforce, different staff groups across the organisation. So our ratios have been fairly consistent for the last few years, and this is largely because our pay awards have been similar or the same for the last few years, the same percentage increase. It's also been helped by the authority's decision over the last few years not to award the Chief Fire Officer a additional pay award, as is possible under the Gold Book terms and conditions. It's a twin track pay award, so that's been an opportunity over the last 4 years, but it's not one that the authority have chosen to practice. So that means that all of the pay rises have stayed consistent, and which has kept the multiples the same. However, we do know that in the last 4 years there have been a couple of occasions, 2 occasions, when the Fire Authority, following a recommendation from the Principal Officer pay group, have made a decision to award the Chief an additional payment for service over and above the expectations of the role. So although that's not the norm, and it's certainly not an expectation, it is one that has happened, and so it might be that in future reports, if that was to become more common practice, we would need to pull that out more clearly in the pay policy statement. So just wanted to draw that to your attention today. Importantly, in terms of our pay policy statement, when we compare ourselves with other organisations, we're well in line with a report that was published in 2011 which gave recommendations on fair pay, and that talked about the multiples between your top earner and your highest earner, and recommended that it should be no more than a multiplication of 20, so a ratio of 1 to 20. And you will see in the report that we're at a ratio of 1 to 8.9. So we're well within those recommendations, and we're also in line with other fire and rescue services such as Kent or our neighbours Dorset and Wilts. You know, this is an annual report. It's one we see every year, but happy to answer any questions if you have some.
Any questions, members? No? Okay. If we can go to the recommendation on page 14, which is that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve the pay policy statement at Appendix A for publication on Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Services website. Agreed? Agreed. Good, thank you. Item 8, retrospective building design principles, healthy and inclusive workplaces. Matt, if you would like to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. So this report seeks approval for a proposed programme of work across our estate to ensure that our buildings remain fit for purpose and reflect the requirements of the modern public service which we strive to be. You'll note that right at the beginning in paragraph 2, the specific funding source for the proposals is yet to be fully developed, and the proposal is that will be included within the a financial update later in the year. The reason we bring this report now without that source of funding confirmed is twofold, really. One is it sets a very clear message to our people and gives confidence to our teams that this is an important priority for the authority. But secondly, with the unprecedented market conditions that we're actually facing at the moment and the price of materials and particularly inflation, there is an opportunity in the background, should the authority approve the intent to do this work today, that the team can work up ahead of funding being confirmed, the procurement, and get everything lined up so that we can go to market much earlier than we would be if we delayed this to later in the year. So we're trying to minimise the financial impact on the programme, given the scale and complexity and the supply chain, but also set a very clear message around the estate strategy going forward. So as a bit of background, the works undertaken in this report are to deliver, in effect, the estate strategy set by the Fire Authority back in September 2018, which are focused around those 5 design principles which are summarised in paragraph 3 for you. Of our 61 fire stations which we now have across Hampshire and the island, the majority are post-war build, but the average age is around 55 years. So clearly the facilities designed in those types of buildings do not meet the future and longer term needs of our workforce or our service as a whole. So providing the investment now allows us to future-proof the estate going forward. So as you see at the bottom of page 20 of your packs, a thorough audit has been done of all 61 fire stations against the design principles, and you can see the outcome of that at the top of page 21. Now this is, although of course there are 5 principles, we focus on the healthy and inclusive in this paper because it is the one that most stations fail to adequately meet. And I just want to point out that although the table in paragraph 10 looks terrifyingly red, all of our buildings are legally compliant, so they all provide toilet facilities and change facilities and what have you as necessary. It is just red because it doesn't meet the aspiration that we've set ourselves, which is a very high aspiration around the design principle, and nor does it meet the ambitious EDI priorities which the authority approved earlier this year. So although it is red, it isn't because they're not compliant. It is because we've set an internal benchmark of saying our buildings should look like this, and they haven't met that. So that is why it looks as it does. Equally, in the table, there's only the whole-time stations that are listed, and that is because, as you'll see in paragraphs 20 and 21, that our on-call stations fare much better because they're smaller, they don't provide the same facilities across the design principle, and also we feel that we can tackle sort of improvements across the on-call estate using business as usual funding. So building that into our revenue budgets year on year, we will sort the on-call facilities out. But they are very different buildings, so they don't have the same need. Equally, they have benefited recently on-call stations from improvements to fireground contamination. So that has been a programme of work over the last couple of years, which was focused on the on-call stations at that time. So the proposal for you on page 22, the recommended approach there is
to focus on 4 key areas. So paragraph 16 just summarises the 3 breakdown of the design principles, which is on fireground contamination, so improving how we manage the risk to fireground contaminants within buildings, and well-being, so promoting and providing facilities for staff, which we appreciate that the work that frontline teams do can have an emotional, a mental and also a physical impact on individuals. So making sure that our buildings support that sort of decompression process when they're back on station is very important. But equally around the EDI agenda, so making sure that our facilities are inclusive for everyone, regardless of their age or their sexual orientation or their gender or their religion or race. So it's making sure that our facilities are designed in a way that they support humans rather than men or women or anyone else in terms of groups. So in order to do this, we're proposing a paragraph 17, you'll see on page 22, to focus on 4 priority areas: upgrading decontamination equipment, following best practice, implement clean, dirty transition zones. This is around redesigning the layout of a building so that the flow supports the decontamination of an individual or a piece of kit. Priority 3 there, providing gender-neutral facilities. So where we've had traditional male-female facilities, trying to reduce those facilities and having just toilets, basically, that anyone can use. And also, number 4 there, improving the privacy and dignity within shared dorms. So we know we have shared rest accommodation across our estate. Again, changing that to provide additional privacy is one of the things that we've focused on. So you'll see the table, the revised table in paragraph 19, which is much less read. So should we approve doing this work, then that is the sort of estimated reassessment of the same building. So they will clearly all suitably meet the principle that we've set ourselves. Page 23 and 24 just provide a nod that there are obviously 4 other design principles that aren't being sort of directly targeted as part of this funding, but to give you some assurance, clearly doing some of this work will have a secondary benefit across other design principles, so will actually improve the estate in a much broader way than just the healthy and inclusive principle. And then page 26, just worth noting the obviously the piece around the funding. So £4.5 million is what is being asked, and you can see the table there has been broken down. That is based on the assumption that we can, assuming the authority will approve this today, we can in the background start work up to make sure we can go to market as soon as funding is confirmed and brought back later in the year for the authority to consider. And you'll see in paragraph 34 just some of the options that finance teams and the estates team will work through around the source of funding. But worth noting that that the capital payments reserve, where we would normally fund projects, is fully committed. So although there is money in that, it is all allocated for other schemes, so we cannot traditionally go back into the capital payments reserve. And as members will be aware, we are using prudential borrowing to fund some of the larger station investment programme schemes, such as Redbridge and Cosham. So the authority has been asked to approve the programme of work in principle, but we will not commence physically doing the work or going to procurement or tender exercise until the source of funding is identified and brought back to the authority later in the year for you to agree that we can fund it in the way proposed. Just for completeness, paragraph 44 on page 27 of your packs just summarises the options that have been looked at. In effect, that is the proposed way forward that we've just spoken about, or option 1, which is not to provide any additional funding, but to fund through business as usual, which can be done. So we could prioritise some business as usual funding to target this work, which obviously would mean not doing other things currently planned in the maintenance programmes. But we estimate that it would take between 5 and 10 years in order to do the same amount of work to do that. So we can't stop everything and reprioritise clearly. We'll be able to allocate a proportion of the annual budget across, which is why we feel that we need the additional investment to prioritise this work. So there's a section around risks on page 28, and I would just like to apologise. Paragraph 49 does have a typo, which I failed to spot. So it referenced the context of paragraph 43, which is an error. It should say paragraph 48. Basically, we've built in an allowance for inflation, and as paragraph 49 says, we will use best efforts to group work cost effectively to minimise the impact of the costs. So I'm sure members will have questions, but hopefully give you an overview of what we're trying to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Chief.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Matt, also. So before you go to your questions, and notwithstanding your interest in this paper, there's a couple of things I just wanted to kind of stress. Two risks that you'll recall, I'm sure, that the principles that Matt's described are dealing with. One of which is the balance. This came up yesterday, actually, the HMI conversation. The balance between doing lots of things to protect our firefighters from contamination. Now, we know, the science tells us, that there is a correlation between certain types of cancers and the job of a firefighter. There's no clear causal link demonstrated in science yet, but nonetheless, as a fire authority, as a service, as chief officer, we have to do something to make sure we take a reasonable stance to protect our firefighters as best we can. And so these design principles that Matt describes are about bringing together a reasonable set of steps we can take to protect retrospectively in buildings that are already built, to protect people best we can. So, but equally, there's millions and millions of pounds you can spend on this, on something that isn't proven as a link. So there's a balance somewhat, and that's what the HMI are asking us about in particular. The second note is to protect us, or to think about the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda, when we've got some fantastic firefighters joining us. We're doing a brilliant job at our entry level, getting people from different backgrounds to join us now. And one of our challenges and risks we have is the likelihood of them joining our organisation, having an enjoyable time and thriving in sometimes places which are not built, have not been built with them in mind. So we do need to do some work to retrospectively adjust those places, so that as we become more successful at recruitment, we can equally be successful at retaining these fantastic people. So we are a changing workforce, and my fear, if you like, if we don't retrospectively do something, it'll take too long to adjust our workplaces, and our people joining us will not have the time they should be having as an employee of this great organisation. So I'll add that sort of the two kind of the reasons for the kind of thrust here to the end of Matt's presentation, just to remind you about why we reached these design principles in the first place. But equally happy, I'm sure Matt and others can answer these questions.
Thank you, Chief. David Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few questions, if that's all right. I'll run through them and just take them as they come. Firstly, we had our budget meeting 6 or 7 weeks ago, and I don't remember any budget provision being put aside for this. So was this report being worked on whilst the budget was being put together? And if so, why was there not any facility put in that budget to deal with this? I appreciate you may not have had the exact figures, but it probably would have been helpful given it wasn't that long ago.
Thank you. So when we talked about the capital programme in the budget, I think we talked about the priority of the £1.7 million for the investment on the Isle of Wight, and then we sort of talked through a variety of different long-term plans that we needed to address funding for. But as you can see from this report, we don't have the funding available for this at the moment. So what we're not doing is bringing back something and saying we'd like this new priority which is funded. We're looking for a statement of support for this work with the funding to be worked on from, and I think it is likely to be, a combination of the potential sources identified in paragraph 34. So I don't think there's going to be a single sort of amount of grant funding or anything that's going to come in and fund this programme for us. So it was referenced in the capital priorities for which we have and have not yet assigned funding for, but we didn't have, I think, either the detailed costs and, as you can see from this report, still don't have the detailed funding.
Second question, Chief, if I could, you mentioned the second risk there with the EDI element and maintaining and retaining staff, particularly with new categories that might be joining us that perhaps haven't in the past. Can I just confirm, when we are recruiting people, we are letting them know the conditions that currently exist in our stations? So when they arrive and are sent off to X, Y or Z fire station, they are not being met with a, hang on a minute, I was sold this was an organisation that everything was hunky-dory and all-inclusive and everything else, whereas actually that's not our situation. Because I'd hate for us to get these people through the door and suddenly actually the reality not being what they were expecting. Because and I'll come on to this in a minute, I appreciate all of this is good stuff and where we need to be, but actually when we're struggling we haven't identified the funding yet, perhaps some of this should be more business as usual rather than immediately extra funding. So, but I'll come on to that in a second if you could just confirm.
Yeah, so Essentially, as Matt described, we are legally compliant. We have facilities in terms of the EDI elements. But as we start to grow our numbers and grow in success, the fear is that they will become more challenging because of the nature of some of our buildings, literally dormitory facilities and those sorts of things. So we can put bits of this station aside for, let's take women as an example, other stations that have maybe 2 or 3 women on them. But actually, as we start to get more success and more women join us, we'll have to think about our facilities in much more detail, and that's what some of this will do. Allow for the greater numbers we're seeing coming through now. So no one's arriving on a fire station going, goodness, there's no facilities for me. No one's having that experience. But obviously, if we don't keep ahead of the game in terms of our ability to allow staff like that to have all the facilities we'd like them to have, we're going to be we'll miss out. So this is the point about the BAU option. It is an option financially, but it's not a preference of ours. So that kind of timing of this is about our analysis, also our recent successes on showing that we can make a difference in our recruitment pool. And that comes with a cost of having to change our facilities, which is, again, the HMI expect to see it. I would expect to see it as a leader in a modern public service, but it is nonetheless challenging.
Thank you. My next one is around the chart on page 21. I understand most of the headings, but a quiet well-being area. Can someone explain what that actually is, please?
Yeah, so it does actually vary, so it's not superscriptive, but in effect, is there a space where people can go to sort of decompress, if you like? So but it also includes things like prayer space, or meditation space, or menopausal space, or any other space around where someone wants some privacy on stations. So most of our stations, given their age, just do not have even a little room that can be used for that kind of thing.
And then comparing that to a rest area being where someone can sleep. So my question around that is, because for me, if we're making this to go above business as usual, we're looking for extra funding, that for me does not sound like a priority if we're going to go and try and make pod spaces for people to sleep in, because that for me would be a relatively individual place people should be able to sit quietly, and allowing that we've got other rest areas for people to go. So my point around this is, for me, is I think this is the right place we want to be heading, but I think we need to separate out perhaps some of these that are a higher priority than others. For me, the decontamination issue I think is high priority. We need to get on and do that straight away. This is people's health we're talking about. And I also think perhaps some of the other elements around individual bed spaces, etc., is fine. But I would say some of this ought to be business as usual. We're heading in the right direction, we're getting there, but for me, when we're handling taxpayers' money and we're saying that we've not got a lot of money and we're always trying to look for savings, perhaps some of this should be covered over as business as usual, particularly around some of the points you've just mentioned, i.e. quiet well-being areas. I struggle to think of many organisations that I know that have quiet well-being areas, taking into account that perhaps the issues being dealt with by the staff are of a slightly different nature to many other organisations. But that's my view. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Jonathan Glenn.
Thank you, Chairman. It's interesting, actually, if you look at the computer agenda compared to the paper agenda, I now realise that there actually is a difference in colour between 4 and 5. You can't see that on the paper agenda, but if you see it on the computer agenda, the 5 is brown. And it'd be interesting to see how many browns. You have to actually annotate each one separately. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you look at the page 21, where, dare I put it, dare I say, the red diagram is, you can see that it says there are, so if you go on to page 23, they talk about the 14 stations that can be seen below. And there aren't. There are 11. Now, there's probably a reason for that, and it's explained somewhere, but if you were a layman looking at this, someone's going to say, what's happened to the few that are missing? So are we talking about 14 or are we talking about 11 is my question. Because if we do over, if we're talking about 4.5 million over 11 stations, that's about 410,000 per station. Obviously, it's less than that if you've got 14. So I'd like to know where we stand on that. And can I just say, we are heading in the right direction here. I'm all for it. And I'm quite certain we'll find the 4.5 million, especially if we go on to page 26, paragraph 34. And I think there's no point in separating the priorities here, because if you're going to get builders in to sort out, if you need builders or consultants in to sort out the contamination flow, if you stop that and do that in other stations and then come back again to do the rest areas and quiet, you're going to add to the bill. People coming and going. It's going to get more expensive that way. So as long as we do it in the most cost-effective way, I'm all for it. And finally, at some point in the future, you're going to find out on paragraph 34, page 26, where we hope to get the necessary capital investment from. Planned contributions from revenue budgets, revenue underspends, which we're quite good at, I do expect that. Sale of assets, I'd like to know what those assets are as soon as possible, certainly on an APAG meeting. Partner contributions, I'd like to know as soon as possible who the partners are who are going to kind of come in with the dosh. I wrote down, are we talking about the police or other people? And borrowing, when we start even contemplating borrowing, can we discuss that as early as possible at APAG? Thank you, Chairman.
Matt.
Yep, so I can certainly, I'll pass to Catherine on the funding question, but certainly on the 14, 30 and 11, yeah, I think you are right, so it is a bit confusing. So it's 14 in paragraph 10. The reason the greener table has 11, I think the 14 reference in paragraph 19 is probably an error, so my apologies, is because we've excluded Redbridge, because obviously that's separate funding paper because we're redesigning the building, excluded Cosham because that's separate funding paper redesigning the building, and excluded Newport because Newport, as it says later on, is also subject to currently a One Public Estate study around what could be done on the island, and we know we will need to do more than just this design principle at, for example, Newport. So they're the three missing ones from your 14 and your 11. But my apologies, there is a typo in paragraph 19, certainly. %, yes.
Thank you. David Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. The chart on page 21 is quite useful, although it always causes consternation when you see so much red on any report. Two questions, really. One of them is, in terms of priority, are we going to factor in usage of each of these individual stations? So, for example, if Cosham Station has about twice as much staff comings and goings as, I'll just pick one at random, St Mary's, would that be a factor that you consider when deciding which comes first? And second question is, I've made the point before that this is a terrible time, really, to start construction projects. If you think about all the issues about the cost of building materials, workforce issues, inflation might run at 9%. It might be even higher with the construction industry. So I'm just wondering whether there is a case for a bit of a hiatus in terms of investing at this time.
Yep. So in terms of prioritised based on use, that wasn't our proposal. So our proposal was to group the work together, almost as a mitigation to your second question, which is that you get better economies of scale still, even though the market is quite difficult. And also, if you go to market with obviously a £4 million scheme across 11 sites, that's a much better project for us to be able to capitalise and squeeze those costs down to where they need to be. I think in terms of the market, you're right. At the moment, inflation's running high, cost of materials running high. There's uncertainty on supply, but currently there isn't an end in sight for that. So this still remains a priority for us, and chances are that the market will still be tough in a year's time, in 2 years' time, particularly the lag on supply of materials is at least 24 months in terms of impacts on supply chain. So you could end up sort of stalling for quite a while, or you say it's a priority and we should go and we should get best value by the way we procure and the way we batch the work together, which is what we're proposing.
Don't we all? Okay, happy? Roger, please.
Thank you. Having looked at the chart on page 21, I was quite horrified to actually see that Basingstoke, which is only about 3 years old, has a red, and it actually only achieves a 1 on out of 5 of the actual headings there. And again, if one looks at Winchester, Winchester is older than Basingstoke, but not that much older, and again has not all greens. That I found quite surprising. Has our criteria changed since we actually designed and built, particularly Basingstoke being the latest one? That's the first point. The other point I wanted to go, and picking up on a point that's been made about grouping things together, as I understand it from what's been said at previous meetings, is the cost of building work on the Isle of Wight is very expensive compared with the mainland. By grouping, and if we group some of the island stuff into a grouping with stuff on the mainland, will we be able to reduce that cost in total to save some of those higher inputs on the island? And the final bit is that I wanted to make was about, I am very pleased about seeing the upgrading of decontamination areas equipment. Is that I went to Fareham, as officers will be aware, and I was horrified at the situation in Fareham about the equipment and the way that the contamination was actually dealt with. And to see new equipment going in there and other stations, if other stations are similar to Fareham, I think it's absolutely essential. Following from that, not really a question to Matt, more of a question probably to Stu or the Chief, is that alongside this is building work. Will we be reviewing and looking at and making sure the firefighters comply with what our regulations are laid down of how they deal with contaminated clothing on fireground and getting it back to the fire station before it goes through this process? Because the two go hand in hand in my book.
Yes, absolutely. So if I apologize if I missed one of your questions, but I think I've jotted them down here. So in terms of Basingstoke and Winchester in particular, as you've asked Basingstoke, the short answer is that yes, our standards and those design principles have come after Basingstoke. So Basingstoke opened in 2018, and obviously design principles were agreed by the Fire Authority at the very end of 2018. That site was designed in 2015-16, so quite a number of years before we really explored the design principle approach. Equally, the research understanding around fireground contamination has moved on quite a lot, and informing the estate's sort of answer to that, if you like, has taken quite extensive research, including exploring internationally standards and approaches done, and also across the country in the UK as well. So it just sort of predates it. So you'll see that, particularly in Basingstoke, it does get 1s and 2s, if you like, across 3 of the 5 areas. But the toilets are a 3 because they're not all gender neutral. So it does provide male toilets, female toilets, and sort of accessible toilets, which are gender neutral by the definition. But it doesn't meet the standard that we're setting to say that actually they should all be gender neutral. For exact reasons that the Chief laid out before, if you have 2, 3 females, for example, on a watch, fine. If you have 10 females on a watch and 2 males on a watch, we're going to have a problem with the facilities. So that's where you future-proof the facilities by in that way. And equally with contamination flow, as I say, our understanding of how the building should support that return to station has changed since 2015. and therefore that benchmark has changed. So although Basingstoke is the most recent, it's, you know, as annoying it may be, it doesn't now meet that internal benchmark, if you like. Including the island, you'll note that the second table, the 11 stations that this is targeting, and none of them are on the island. So all 11 of those are mainland stations, so will be batched accordingly, because the island currently has Newport as its whole-time station, which is subject to a separate business case to look at what we do with Newport. And then Ryde, which is currently a 12-hour crude station at Ryde, but that again is highlighted in the report as it needs some separate investment, which we'll do separately through business as usual, because we know there's some pressing things there. So no, we don't anticipate that the island factor, if you like, you referred to, will impact it. And including and on Fareham, you know, your reflections are true, and you will see that reflected in the scoring, hopefully, on that page there. I think just before I hand over to Stu, your last question around the flow, the contamination will only work if the cultural change from firefighters is changed with it. And the two go hand in hand, and the estates aspect is only but one part of that whole journey, from, you know, how kit is wiped down or washed on the fireground itself before it even goes into the vehicle and comes back to the station, and same with people. But I'll hand over to Stu if he's got anything else to add.
Thank you, and thanks for the question and the interest, because it is a really important subject, as already been mentioned elsewhere in the meeting. I was going to just say that, a similar thing, that the contamination or fireground contaminants is one of our risks on the organisational risk register. So I own that risk for the organisation, and we have a load of work streams that sit beneath that, of which premises or our estates is just one of those. The main bit of work which we can do and is being done at the moment is around exactly that culture, and around teaching people that the important thing is for them to be able to react to the threat or the risk of fireground contaminants. So there's a recent study done by University in Lancashire, of which we've done a gap analysis of that, and there's a team that sits within Matt's department in operational assets that have done that gap analysis. Much of that is around our procedures and how we react and how we deal with things way before it gets to back to a fire engine or back to a fire station. So all of that is being worked on in terms of how we manage those procedures, and then how we teach our firefighters the right skills, and very much the right skills are getting taught at the earliest outset, which is out there on the fireground on training exercises here today. So all of our new recruits have this drummed into them, if you like, to make sure that they're familiar with everything. It's inbred into their, into their DNA, if you like, as a firefighter, and when they go out onto the station, that they keep maintaining that. Just the final point is the work that we're doing is quite extensive, and it's quite far-reaching, and we're doing that with the rep bodies. So the FBU are really contributing to this this project, because it's one of their major risk areas for awareness. So we're working, as close as we can with everyone to make sure that everything is considered under that umbrella.
Can I get the point that you made about new recruits, it being drummed into them? Totally understand that, and they will carry that forward through their career. But the problem area probably is, with all respect to firefighters, the longest serving firefighter who's always done whatever they've done all their life, but trying to make sure they do what is right and proper to protect themselves, and also, equally as important, if not more importantly, others as well. And what controls do you have to make sure that they are complying? Because that to me is the risk area.
So you're absolutely right. That is our biggest area, is to reteach people some of those actions, and that's why we've involved the rep bodies, in particular the FBU, because it's a different channel of communication to try and really hammer home the messages, and to try and change that culture that Matt mentioned there. So some of the things that we do is out on the fireground we have officers that attend a fire incident. They're there to command the incident, but if they're not needed, what they do is an audit of the fireground, And one of the areas that they check is around decontamination and making sure that people, once they're finished their firefighting operations, are going through the correct measures and taking the correct measures that we would want them to take, and then reporting that back through our operational learning sort of mechanism, so that we can capture all of that and make sure that it's all fully embedded. And that's where the team are coming in, pushing the procedures to start with, but then getting that quality assurance at the end.
Ian. Sorry to keep you.
I was actually just listening to Stu's answer to Roger there. If we don't give firefighters the opportunity to undertake decontamination in a specific way, then they will rely on the culture and habit of years gone by. I think that is why it's important that we follow this through, is to raise the level, give opportunity, and follow it through, monitor it, and make sure that these things are undertaken. That's all I wanted to say about that. But what I am concerned about is the inflationary pressures, and we're talking 0.9 million built in for inflation. I'm just a little bit concerned about that. And I'm going to say that and leave it, because we don't know what that's going to turn up like. I don't believe in doing things in, if I might say, a piecemeal fashion over 5 years, 10 years. I think that what we need to do is undertake what is proposed here and get it dealt with and move it forward. I think that it will eventually, and with all the goodwill in the world of our officers, when we train firefighters, there's an immense amount of money that goes into that, an immense amount of care, and, if you like, taking things forward. For someone to leave the service, we lose that. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that we have acceptable 21st century facilities for our firefighters, and indeed our staff throughout. And I want to leave it at that, Chair, because quite honestly, I think that it's a must. It's a must that we have to move forward. I know there's uncertainty, and I do mention inflation, etc., and that goes on to the building materials and wages and salaries and transportation costs. Just to finish up with, we do have a situation where we have a new PCC. Well, she's been in virtually a year. We should be looking at probably co-locations, not just on the Isle of Wight at Newport, but elsewhere. And this is what I take to, when I looked at page 26 and paragraph D of 34, partner contributions, I thought, oh yeah, well that quite easily could be that we have the ambulance service and the police co-locating in certain areas where the police stations are closed at this present time and probably not going to be open on a full-time basis. We could actually bring them in, if you like, to share with our estate. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. David Fuller, part 2.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 22, we've got priorities 1 to 4, which handily fit in with the chart on page 21, except it doesn't mention at all quiet well-being areas, which would suggest they're not much of a priority in the grand scheme of this piece of work, which takes me back to my point around perhaps they should be business as usual rather than additional funding. It's less of a question, more of a point.
I can come back on that because it also helps. So priority 4 is around improving the privacy and dignity in shared dormitory areas. So it is because most of our sites currently have large rooms with beds around the edge. So they're shared, gendered dorms largely. So that's what we're trying to put right. The solution to put right, which is cost effective, is not building floor to ceiling walls. Actually, it's pods that sit in that are slightly different. So what that doesn't provide is sort of a quiet space. You will hear what's going on in other spaces, which is why there's the separate piece around well-being spaces that are separate, which are quieter, probably in a different part of the building, that away from where other people are all, sleeping or talking or whatever. So it is part of priority 4, because we remove your point earlier around can you use the pod to also do the well-being thing. The reason we don't think we can in the retrospective world is because they're not floor-to-ceiling, they're not that quiet, they don't have doors on them, they just have a curtain, for example. So depending on what the situation is, it's not the privacy and dignity piece that we're trying to do, which is why there is the extra column on your graph that isn't a priority on here, but it's captured in priority 4. I'm not sure I'm explaining that well, but that's why. So the two go hand in hand.
Perhaps priority 4 needs slightly amending, if that's going to be the case. But then, of course, we're prioritising everything rather than nothing in that regard, because everything's covered. But
Okay, thank you. Derek Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I don't think anybody's thanked Matt. I think this is a very comprehensive paper. The one, and well, thanks to you for that. The one area that isn't really covered, which is what we're really talking about today, is whether we'd be able to support this on financial grounds. To be quite frank, when you see figures of 4.5 million over 14 locations, when you see words like 55 years of existing buildings, I know they've been upgraded piecemeal over the time, but if you're talking about a depreciation policy of, 14, 15 years on these, it is not a heavy sum. The fact is we've got to do so much work, that is not questioned, and the fact is we've got no capital reserve, according to Catherine. So I think the whole question now boils down to it. I've not heard anything today that, apart from David and his well-being rooms, etc., that goes against the fact that we need to do this work. And I honestly think we should be focusing really on the financial side of things. Of course, I'm a county councillor with Hampshire County Council that's got unended volumes of money available for absolutely everything at the moment. But but we do have to make good, and we're still undertaking, 380 odd million pounds of capital work while there is no money available. So I have to say, I think the paper should be we should be moving to a conclusion on this, in that we recognise the work needs to be done. The economies of scale of doing the whole project rather than piecemeal are undoubted. I cannot accept David's suggestion that it's now not a good time to do these things because of inflation. Yes, inflation may well run up to 8–9%. On highways at the moment, we've got inflation on materials of 17% this year. So, but you can't stop a project because inflation will come back to 2 or 3% ultimately, but it will never come back to below what we've got at present. So I think we have to ignore that comment. There's been built-in provision for that. So I really like to suggest that we do give this maximum support, and that we should be now looking at how it's going to be financed.
Thank you, Derek. Good point.
An opinion. Thank you, Chair.
And what?
An opinion. Thank you,
No,
Chair.
good. Fine, fine. We've got 3 more questioners, which is fine. I hope we're not going to get repetitive. Jason?
Thank you, and I hope I'm not repetitive at all.
Sorry.
That's okay. Sorry. In principle, I'm happy to agree. I think it's a good report, and I'm heartened, being parochial, for the improvements that are projected for Southsea. I realise Cosham has been explained has been taken out after it appears in the first chart on page 21 because it's part of separate investment. But it would just be reassuring to hear, bearing in mind when Roger touched on the issue about Basingstoke being a relatively new station and there's a 4 showing already, what the projection for Cosham will be. One would hope it's all 1s and 2s, but if we can get some clarity, that would be useful. And the other one is people are starting to touch on finance quite rightly. 4.5 million for this. Having seen some situations in Portsmouth where I'm sure we're not alone, prices do go up. I suspect there's a real possibility this 4.5 won't be enough to cover it, but we'll see. And I think David Fuller makes a very good point. The issue about whether we should have some priority over some of these, there is no prioritisation given per se. It seems to be an all-in.
but I think what you said about wellbeing areas, I concur with. So, you know, if it's looking at a struggle, either we're going to have to throw some more money in if we don't stick to the budget of 4.5, or we prioritise the areas that we've got. And has come forward, decontamination, clearly I would rate as the main one, but maybe we need to sacrifice, unless we're prepared to throw more money in, should costs go up. But that's it. I hope I didn't repeat anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. I keep coming back to the point, I'm the new kid on the block. So I've never seen the design principles when they were adopted by this authority back in the day. So I'm sat here being told by the Chief Fire Officer that all of our stations are legally compliant. And we have a paper in front of us saying that actually we need to do a lot of work on them to bring them up to modern standards. What I don't understand at the moment, and nobody's explained to me, is where we have legal compliance at one end of the pendulum, how far are these standards at the other end? Are they gold plated? Are we going to have gold plated shower heads in these facilities? Are we going to have granite tiles on the floor? I don't know where we sit in terms of those costing mechanisms to work out where we are. So I'd like to know where we are in that scheme. David made a good point about the pods. Theoretically, a well-being pod, if somebody wants to use it and is busy, is that affecting their well-being? How many pods do we need to have? Do we have to have one for every person? I don't know. So I really would like to understand what we're getting for our money. I understand the functionality we're getting, but actually what we're going to be getting for our money. I'm not against it per se, but when I joined the Royal Navy in 1975, my first ship was laid down in 1959. It was a wreck. 18 men living in a railway carriage with a mess square the size of two of these tables together. That was it. Ship evolution and shipbuilding went on. 4 or 5 ships later, I went into the ship in the Type 21 frigate. They took me down to my mess. They opened the door and I looked and I went, no, I'm a junior rate. I'm not a senior rate. They said, no, this is junior rate accommodation. That's how it evolved over time because of modern builds, modern construction. And actually, the living accommodation on a Type 21 frigate, this is not being sexist, was designed by a lady, and it was the best accommodation we ever had in the Royal Navy. Designed by a female who'd never been to sea. Brilliant. So the point I'm trying to make is I'm not against the content of the paper. It's understanding what we're actually going to get for that £4.5 million, allowing that contingency in there. Because if unisex toilets were put in Abbey Wood, the mod procurement executive, in 1996. You know, gender-neutral toilets. They've been around forever. Why are we only coming around to this idea now? You know, why is it so modern? So I'd like to understand that point of it. I'm not against the paper, but understanding what it is we're actually buying with that money. Thank you.
Well, Matt, you're ex-Royal Navy. One for you, I think.
So, good question. So I think from the legal point of view is we provide, for example, toilets. If we take an example here, provide toilets. The benchmark internally that's set by our design principles and the strategy is that we don't provide gendered toilets. So we provide gender-neutral toilets. So instead of having a little man on the door, a little woman on the door, you just have the word toilet, and then it's usable by everybody. So obviously that designs out of a building anything around someone's identified gender or sexuality or anything like that, but equally it designs out any assumption that a watch of firefighters in 10, 20 years' time will still be male-dominated. So by providing a large toilet facility for men and a smaller space for women, you've designed into a building the assumption that men will always outnumber women. So our strategy is to move away from that. It is not a legal requirement to move away from that, but that is the ambition that the authority has set for the organisation to say we should absolutely just be providing facilities for people. So it is not, they're not gold-plated. They do not have anything over what you would have if you didn't, if you gendered them, for example. But hopefully that helps to explain. So it's not, we can go into more detail through an APAG, for example, through the design principles if that's useful. But it's moving away from what is legally required to actually where we feel we should be to support our workforce and future-proof our buildings. It is also worth bearing in mind that this approach on these stations is going to be significantly cheaper than redesigning all of the buildings, obviously, and you can see that in the station investment programme compared to this cost. This is 10% of the cost of the 2 new buildings that are being built in Portsmouth and Southampton. So we're retrospectively trying to significantly improve the facilities at a very little cost. Also, although £4.5 million is the figure that's obviously in the report, it isn't £4.5 million worth of work we're proposing. It's 3.15 million, and then there is £450,000, I think it was, for fees, and then there was 900,000, so about 28% allowance for inflation and supply chain pressures. So we have built in a considerable chunk of money on top of the 3.15 to try and deliver the programme. It is not 4.5 and then there's nothing for inflation. That isn't what's being proposed. So I think just taking Councillor Fasakli's question, the Cosham and Redbridge would be ones across the board, 100%. So they will be, it's much easier to design it, you know, completely from scratch. So they will meet the design principles and the ambition. Well, hopefully that helps to sort of explain your points, Councillor Hughes.
And lastly, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm bringing us on to the recommendations, so this is not repetition, okay? I think, let's go to my first point, that I presume if we agree the recommendations, one of which I want to amend, we're not giving the green light for the consultants to get started. The £450,000, there's no green light there. Okay.
No, because
So
we won't have that funding. So
any work that might be done behind the scenes, we're going to pay for internally, okay? Good. I think to placate some of this, and I can see both sides of the argument, albeit I'd like to see this being done, it should be subject to the provision and approval of funding. That's what I'm suggesting in recommendation, which is number 56. Because at the moment, it's just about the approval of funding. I think we need to be sure that we have the provision of it before we can approve it. I'm moving that forward as an amendment to the recommendation.
Sorry, Chairman, but isn't that covered by 57.57 and the recommendations?
Well, it's just that it makes the 56 easier to understand, that's all. It's a belt and brace job.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Thank you.
Can I suggest, before we vote on amendment, item 57, the undertaken by our finance team is removed, otherwise we are reversing our own.
I wasn't even going to mention it. Right, members, thank you. I mean, this paper was always going to excite and attract a bit of interest, and that's what we're for, so well done. Thank you for very searching questions. Good stuff. Anyway, we come to the recommendation on page 30, which are that, subject to provision and approval of funding, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approves the programme of work set out in option 2, and the principle and priorities set out at paragraphs 5 to 21, to improve facilities to meet the healthy and inclusive design principle on fire station sites. And secondly, that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority note the work will be undertaken by the finance and estates teams to develop proposals for funding the programme of works, such proposals to be brought back for approval by the authority as part of an update to the medium-term financial plan later in the year. Agreed?
Just before you take it, you did say 5 to 21, you meant 15 to 21.
I meant 15 to 21.
Just to be sure.
Two with a small o.
Yeah.
Okay. Agreed? Thank you. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 9, blue light collaboration. Oh, sorry, Matt, anything to close?
no, not at all. Thank you, members, for discussion. Okay.
Item 9, blue light collaboration, which is on page 31 of your paperwork. Stu, if you would like to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this paper has a couple of purposes. One, to summarise and remind members of some of the collaboration efforts that we've gone through over the past while, and also for new members, just as a bit of an intro. And it also fulfills a requirement within the Constitution to bring forward a report every 12 months around this, which is related to the legal requirement around collaboration. set out in the Police and Crime Act 2017. But the majority of our work in collaboration is because it's a good thing to do for the organisation. It's a good thing for the safety of the people that we serve in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. It's also good for resilience across the board, and it's also good for our income and our finances. So when we're talking about blue light collaboration in particular in this paper, it does relate to, in the main, fire, police and ambulance. So fire with our Network Fire Control or a Network Fire Services partnership with Dorset and Wiltshire and Devon and Somerset, with police forces such as Hampshire Constabulary, and with ambulance services such as South Central Ambulance, South East Ambulance and also the Isle of Wight. But it also incorporates some other organisations which are we see as blue light. So those that are constituted under local resilience forums, so there's some mention within there. There's other organisations which we've already mentioned, like the wider NHS, which we would consider a blue light collaboration. So historically, we're very strong in this area. So for the past more than a decade, we've had an arson task force, which is a joint piece of work between police and between fire, housed in this building. We've been co-responding with South Central Ambulance for more than 15 years. So you can see operationally, we've worked with other agencies for quite some time. Also organisationally, we've worked with other organisations, which I'm sure you're very familiar with in terms of shared services, our buildings that we've just been talking about, and also things like fleet management, where we work with other fire services around their fleet. So from paragraph 10, there's an update of probably more of the operationally based initiatives that we are included in and going through. I don't propose to go into any in-depth areas in particular, but happy to go into those or answer any questions later. But one thing that I did want to pull out, just as it's timely around paragraph 21, is around our response to the COVID pandemic. Here you will be familiar with lots of work that we've done, and I'm really proud of the way the teams have reacted and maintained our core demand through this period of time, as well as providing the service to the public for and on behalf of other organisations. But much of that has been facilitated through the motivation and goodwill of our staff, and been informed and helped to be shaped by informal local agreements. And this isn't really a sustainable contractual position for us, especially as I would imagine as we go forward, our services, because we've demonstrated how good we can be in this space across all of our services, that we're likely to be asked for this more in the future. And I'll just draw your attention to, in terms of that risk for us, that if we need to look at that, we're going to have to be able to provide better, more flexible services, and we'll need to enter into things like contractual negotiations potentially in the future. But obviously, we'll come back to you for updates and for opinions and progress around that. So I just wanted to summarise by saying that we continue to collaborate with our blue light services because it's the right thing for us to do. We've got a strong history in this, and we'll continue to take the opportunities and seek the opportunities as we do going forward. And obviously next year I look forward to providing a further update on where we've been over this last 12 months. Hopefully no pandemic driving some of that collaboration. So very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Stu. First off, we have Roger.
Thank you. Three points. The first point is that on paragraph 12A about CORO, it says they're Pacific rural localities on the fourth line. As we know, Portchester is one of the busiest COROs, and that is serving the greater Portsmouth area, Portsmouth, Havant, Fareham and Gosport. And I wouldn't regard that as a rural locality. I would have said it's more urban. And so I'm just questioning whether that is right. The other point I'd like to make is that in paragraph 8C, you mentioned the arson task force. Well, to me, the Arson Task Force is one of our great gold achievements, in the sense that we've been working with the police for many, many years, and I believe we still have the best prosecution rates in the country for arson. And so that isn't itemised in greater detail like the other items are. So I think it should have been. That would be my comment. The other thing, which is, and you're saying about the risk in that with the ambulance service, is that they're calling upon us there to do work for them. Now, to me, the risk is going to be is that hopefully we don't get it, but should we have a strike of firefighters, when we have to be very resilient, using all of our services wherever we can to keep our own service going, and we've always been able to achieve that. Now, that is going to put the ambulance service at great risk, because we're not going to be able to back up them as well, should that ever happen.
Thank you. So if I, in order, so the co-responding, that refers to the co-responding, which I would say is the normal operating model of co-responding, which is where in the rural locations someone has a pager and is then called upon in their normal daily life, like our on-call firefighters. The model at Porchester is very much more around a dedicated resource for a period of time, and that's why it's one of our most used resources and assets. And it does deploy into Portsmouth, and you're quite correct around that. So there probably, and maybe for the record, needs to be added in a paragraph around the two different types of co-responding model. One which is a dedicated vehicle, as Porchester has, and one is a less dedicated vehicle, albeit has a dedicated person in there. The reason for Arson Task Force not having its own section, so to speak, is just by virtue of the fact that we've had previous examples of this paper in previous years, and I mentioned about it within the Constitution, it's mentioned that we will do an annual report, and it was purely because a lot of that is that detail is mentioned in previous reports. So it's not to diminish the work of the Arson Task Force, which is an absolutely great asset and is looked upon by others across the country as a great asset, and does have a really high success rate. It's not to diminish their work at all, it's just that we've reported that previously. And finally, I've forgotten the last...
The other one was
the
about...
reliance,
strike, yeah.
reliance of ambulances. So we do, every time we get a request to stand up our resources, we do consider it really properly in the rounds to make sure that we can deliver our core work. So it's never at the expense of our core work. It's always that we have the capacity to be able to respond to both. So to give you an example, at the moment we are responding to cardiac arrest calls, the majority of our stations across the county. That relates to one call a day, roughly on average. So it's not a huge volume of calls that we're doing, and we're not providing ambulances. What we are doing is we're able to provide the resilience for ambulance when they're not able to do that. So it's less dramatic, I guess, is the response that we give. Albeit, if you're in cardiac arrest, you need someone there really quickly. So it is very dramatic in that sense.
Stu, can we ask for an update of future plans from SCAS?
I think part of the issue with SCAS, and of course and hopefully you realise that I keep in regular touch with the Ops Director of SCAS. This isn't their normal planning period. So what they're experiencing at the moment is not part of their normal planned operations. It's very much led by the demand being struck from hospitals and the delays in ambulances being stacked in hospitals, and the further delays within the further NHS. So they do keep us up to date. We have officers deployed in the health environment. So we have a more senior and strategic officer looking at the whole health system, and working with them. And then we have a very tactical officer that is working day to day with SCAS to try and manage that demand and work through that.
Okay, perhaps it's something we might discuss at the next APAG, because I mean, helping out is one thing.
Yeah.
You know, if it becomes part of our regular routine, it's another.
Absolutely.
Chief?
I was going to make that very point, actually, Chairman, because as the integrated care system emerges and becomes, I suppose, influential, because South Central Ambulance Service is one of those services which is commissioned currently by CCGs, but will become commissioned by the integrated care system. We are then down the stream commissioned by the ambulance service to assist them. And at some point we may be asked to consider direct work for ICS, and that's something which you will need to consider as a fire authority, taking that very question into account. How reliable can we be? How can we be assured that we can deliver against any likely future request or ask to be permanently built into an agreement between us? So I think there's definitely one to explore at APAG about giving me the guidance about how we want me to negotiate on those points.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Stu. Derek Miller, please.
Well, actually, I was going to ask about the situation with the South Central Ambulance Service, but can I just make a general comment? When we've got so many collaborations, is there always a lead partner in those collaborations, or is it just a meeting of the minds?
Quite often there is a lead. So we meet as a collective. So police, fire and ambulance, we meet on a regular basis at a strategic level, and then our teams meet as a result of those conversations, or indeed meet as a result of the localities that they work in or the areas that they work in. So most of the time an agency will take the lead, but it is very much done in collaboration.
Sorry, the reason I posed that was it did strike me from the paper that we seem to be being, I wouldn't quite say used, but we seem to be on the receiving end of the requests from the other members a lot more than we're asking members to contribute to the fire service. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, we do take the lead in quite a lot of the space, and I think that that's down to the skills and capability that we have, and across the members of our teams that have developed that over the years, and the opportunities that have arisen. We do have a sense of going looking for opportunities around collaboration, perhaps more so than our partners.
Thanks, Chairman. And just to add to that point, nationally, there's a review of civil contingencies happening right now, and government's having a think about how it wants to learn lessons from COVID. Fire and rescue services nationally have been seen as sort of key partners in a lot of that fabric, not in making things happen. But equally, you know, we have, much like the armed services, the idea of having capacity, a standing capacity when not at war, clearly. We are, you know, in a way that's similar. So sometimes people draw a distinction or a similarity between us and policing. We're much more akin to the armed forces, and that's where we are built for a capacity to deliver when it's required. When it's not being required, we are standing army ready to assist in other ways. So certainly locally, the conversations we've had with partners is think of us like your armed services, but much more local, and we can assist where you need to. But clearly, there's an ongoing conversation about terms and conditions of our employees. There's a role which you need to play as a fire authority, saying where are the limits in that regard. You know, what is collaboration? What is just being used commercially or for some other reason? And bear in mind, things like the ambulance service are commercial operations. They are commissioned by a public body. Unlike us, we are a public body, and that's the kind of slight distinction between the two organisations.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's semantics, but I'm just curious to know what the difference is between collaboration and mutual support.
I think it's probably a legal term for us, but you know, the duty to collaborate was always an odd one we felt when it was put in the statute books, because a duty to collaborate, you know, if someone imposes a duty on you to help me, then obviously at that point the help might be slightly mealy-mouthed, arguably, but if you want to help each other because it's mutually beneficial, then that happens naturally. So we've always felt, and in fact your response to Fire Authority was there was no need for a duty to collaborate, because we felt the need to collaborate was instinctive in public services. So you know, there is a difference in the sense of the Act which governs us, in terms of we have to come to the aid of other fire and rescue services. We have to, under civil contingencies law, come to the aid of other agencies in their time of need. It gives us the power to do it. but the duty to act is our choice. It gives us the ability to act should we need to.
David Harrison.
Yeah, it's a very positive report, and of course, really welcome the whole concept of collaboration. I think, you know, if you consider the importance of it for the communities that we represent, then, you know, I think we can feel justifiably proud of the role that we play in it. However, I think as a member, I would probably appreciate a briefing as to how we've got to where we are. In a sense, the report is too positive. I'm sure there are downsides to collaboration. You know, immediately spring to mind, can we make decisions as quickly as we would like to, or are we sometimes slowed in our decision-making process as a result of having to talk to others? I'm sure that a lot of lessons have been learnt over the past decade or so, but I think that, you know, it's also right, isn't it, to review from time to time how we've got to where we are. I don't like, for example, the idea of, somebody mentioned the word mission creep, that, you know, we suddenly take on responsibilities as a regular feature of what we do, which was never intended at the outset. And to what extent are we as an authority, you know, taking more of the burden than we should do without necessarily getting the benefit? And I do have the overall impression that we are leaned on rather more than we lean on other partners. You know, I think that's probably enough that I need to say in this forum, but you know, it would be quite interesting for a members' briefing, perhaps at APAG, to understand the journey that we've been on and some of the downsides to collaboration and how they might be managed to our benefit in the future.
Yeah, very happy to.
I think this would be an ideal topic for APAG. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, Jonathan.
Yes, I've just picked this up throughout the conversation. I'm all for the collaboration, and I'm all for reviewing it. And but reference the South Central ambulance service driving that we do. Do we receive a financial contribution for all this work?
So co-responding, is fully funded through a collaboration agreement and has been for many years. I think if you're looking at the report and you're looking at 21 through COVID, that has been covered through. So we've recorded our costs, and some of that has been recovered through the COVID grants that we've got from government to enable us to be able to respond to the needs, and they were quite specific. The Minister was quite specific with what those grants were there provided to do to help with the pandemic.
Thank you. If I may, Chairman, COVID will eventually go away. The grants will disappear, but the collaboration will continue. I think if we're going to review things, which I believe is the right thing to do, and we are doing a lot of, as it were, contributing, we need to arrange for a contribution of the personnel to us by the personnel of this fire service for the work being done. I think that's probably the best way forward. I imagine there'll be money going back and forwards all the time, but if we are on the giving side of it, we're going to pick up some money. Might pay, for example, improving the facilities for our staff. Okay, so I think we should really look at this.
Might pay for one of your pods. Okay, thank you. Stu, any closing remarks?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. If I can draw your attention to the recommendation on page 38, that progress of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Rescue Service working with partners be noted by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Full Authority. I think that's how it works. Agreed? Thank you. Item 10, open minutes from a stakeholders committee meeting. Roger, if you would like to comment, say something.
Well, I'm quite happy to comment on anything that anybody wants, any questions, but I don't think there's anything I really need to say other than to say that the company is doing very well. It's financially viable. and has paid money back to the service during the last year, and it looks to a good future.
So you're happy to sign the minutes?
I'm happy to approve, to recommend them.
Good, thank you. Agreed. Item 11, minutes of Standards and Governance Committee. Liz?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to present the minutes of the Standards and Governance meeting, which was held on Friday, the 11th of March. Happy to take questions. But actually, it was all about the internal audit. So, hope you're all happy. Thank you.
Okay, all agreed with that? There's you on it. Item 12 allows me to clear the room, turn all the electrics off, and say goodbye to everybody. But we're not going to do that because we can move to item 13, which is the exempt minutes from a stakeholders committee. And if members will agree to that, then we can go ahead. Do you agree to that?
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for a nice, healthy debate. That is good.